G'day folks, and welcome to this rules primer for the company scale system. This is the first in a series of videos where I'll be going over the rules for the company scale system, focusing on Tinian and giving you a sort of a broad idea of how these play out. I'm not going to go through the rules in detail and cover absolutely everything, but this will certainly give you an overview and help you get started. This first video is focused on the broader sequence of play. I run through what the various numbers mean on these counters and the different types of activation counters that you'll see in the cup. This is both designed for new players, if you're brand new to the CSS system, but also for those making the port over from the Grand Tactical system. GTS and CSS have many similarities that I've discussed in a previous video, but CSS has a series of very minor additional rules and rules modifications that really give it a unique flavour. It feels different to GTS. Now, I've set up Tinian because it is probably the most manageable, best title to get started with of all the CSS publications thus far. And as I said, I've set up scenario 1. It's a nice little compact scenario. This is pretty much the field of play. It's bound by these .61 hexes that run along here. So this is where everything will be happening. And you'll see the American 4th Marine Division will be running in here and landing on these invasion beaches. It runs throughout the course of the day on the 24th of July, 1944. In this particular scenario, the Japanese are really just trying to focus on eliminating American units, American infantry, engineer units in particular, and occupying parts of this historical Jig Day area at the end of the day. Now, as you can see, it is a hex-based game, and in both GTS and CSS, the terrain of the hex is indicated by the coloured dot at the centre of the hex. So you can basically, you could effectively ignore sort of the background terrain and just focus on that coloured dot and cross-reference this with the terrain effects chart to see really what you're dealing with. In most cases on Tinian, it's sugarcane because most of the island was used for sugarcane plantations. Now, that terrain may have an effect on combat. It may be blocking terrain. It may contribute to the defender's defensive value. It's also important for movement. Different types of terrain require different movement costs. And of course, roads were very important in the Grand Tactical series. They're still important in the company scale system, perhaps to a lesser extent. Now, of course, one of the first things you need to do when learning a new game is figure out what all the numbers, letters mean on these counters. And in this regard, I think the company scale system really helps new players compared to GTS. Let me contrast with a GTS counter here, and all the information presented on this GTS counter compared with a company scale system counter. And again, the rules are very similar. We haven't lost much between the two titles. There is just really a simplification of this information. So let me run through what we've got here. Armor value, well, it's not listed here. If there's no armor value, it's assumed to be 0. So whilst this counter shows a little 0 white armor value, this counter doesn't bother with that information. You can assume it's 0 unarmored soft target. It's fairly easy. The fire value has moved to the bottom left. So this red 4 means it is a small arms firing unit. We can contrast this with this purple 4 up here. This was a light mortar unit. Basically means it had light mortars alongside small arms for more effective firepower. But the CSS company scale system has simplified a lot of these fire types. So light mortars no longer play a role in the company scale system. And indeed, if we look at the charts and table, you'll see that simplification. We have small arms in red, most of the infantry, some high explosive, black for your indirect fire, your artillery units, and then units with a white fire type can choose between armor piercing, typically if they're firing at a hard target, or high explosive, typically if they're firing at a soft target. So there's that simplification of the fire types and that information on the counter to make it easier. In GTS, troop quality was tracked on each individual counter by this number up in the top right. But for the most part, the troop quality was the same for all units, not only in formation, but throughout much of the division. And so in the company scale system, Adam has decided to remove that number, and instead troop quality is now tracked on the divisional display and is the same for all units in that division. Again, this has pretty much the same effect. It just simplifies the information on the counter, and it makes it easier for particularly new players to learn the game, and it cleans up the counters. Movement values, which were just below troop quality, in this case most infantry were 4, are still shown, but now in the bottom right of counters. Now, if a unit has no, it means they can't move. And this is an additional rules tweak in the company scale system. Their units become, in effect, deployed, and that really, in effect, prevents them from moving. They have this no movement here. They're deployed for battle. They stay where they are. You'll also notice that the assault values on this GTS counter shown in the small sort of subscripted number here, the 6 in red in pink, has just been removed from the company scale system. And again, I think this is a great modification. There is a more streamlined assault sequence, which I love. Despite playing many hours of GTS, I still kind of dread running through an assault because it's always complex, and CSS simplifies this to a great extent, which I'll talk through in a moment. So those assault ratings have been removed and all their complexities. Now, some counters will still have an armor value, and different terrain and fire effects have an armor modification. And when there is a defense or armor modification, it's shown in the bottom center of a counter. So foxholes, for example, provide a beneficial -1 terrain modifier. And again, if you've played the GTS series, it's the same in CSS. Negative defense modifiers benefit the defender. Positive defense modifiers benefit the attacker. The reason for that is that the firepower rating is the number the attacker wants to hit, equal to or less than, to hit the defender. A negative modifier will reduce this, making it harder to hit. A positive modifier will increase this number, thus making it easier to get equal to or less than that target number. And there are two other little bits of information, of course. There's the background colour. So we have here the 4th Marine Division and the 2nd Marine Division. And those background colours simply represent the different divisions, and it's exactly the same with the GTS series. And then we have the colour band, and this represents the formation that these units belong to. You may also encounter these white striped units. They belong to the division as a whole. And you may encounter these no striped units, such as these tanks on the right. And they can be attached to any formation or be activated with the division as a whole. Now this, of course, includes another key rules change in CSS, the use of special weapons. These are attached to friendly units of that division and move around. There are a lot of restrictions on the placement of these, where units can move. I'll talk about that later on. Now, each turn of the company scale system begins with a brief preparation phase. If this is the first daylight turn of the day, the 0500 turn, you'll do a weather determination for most scenarios. You'll check for division fatigue, which I'll talk about in a moment. You'll redistribute the special martini and scotchu markers, which I'll talk about in a moment. And then on every turn, you'll spend dispatch points to add chips to this cup. These chips will then be drawn one at a time to determine who takes an activation. After you've purchased those chips, which I'll talk about in a moment, and checked your fatigue, you'll then adjust your fatigue levels based on whether or not you've purchased division activations or whether or not it's a night turn. And then each player will roll to gain more dispatch points and then place any reinforcements scheduled to arrive on the turn. With that preparation phase done, you move on to the action phase. You put all the purchased chips in the cup, and then if it's the 0500 turn, you remove any illumination rounds. Now that action and activation system is the heart and soul of the game. Depending on what you draw, various things can happen. As I said, if you draw a wind chit, all barrage and illumination rounds are removed. If it's a Naval support chit. The US player can use his task forces to attack Japanese units. The same with the air support unit, but with regards to airstrike, interdiction. If it's a random event, you might consult the random event table, determine sort of a random event. There are subtle differences then in the division, formation, and direct command activations. The division activation is very powerful, basically activates all units of that division. They can perform their first action for free, and then you can spend direct command points for them to spend a second action. So this is all units of that division. Formation activations are similar, but it is restricted to those units of that formation. They again have to be in command to perform a second action. But as I said, these cost 1 dispatch point. These cost 2 for the entire division. But because this is so powerful, you need to watch that troop quality and fatigue level reductions, which may then, down the track, restrict your ability to play these counters. Now, to perform those second actions on a division or formation activation chit, units need to be in command. This means being within the command range of a headquarters unit of their formation or division, so in this case 4 hexes, or if they're stacked with or adjacent to a leader of their formation or division. And of course, a direct command chit is very similar to direct command in GTS. You basically spend 1 direct command point to activate each unit, and they can only perform that 1 action, no second actions. Scenarios will dictate what chits to place in the cup. I've set aside my amphibious movement chit as the first one to be activated. I've set aside my bombardments, which will begin the scenario, along with some air support. I have my first wave of reinforcements arriving just at the top of the screen, and then I have that initial wave in the approach boxes heading towards the beach, while the Japanese are all set up on the island in this northern sector. So, what are some of those changes to the chit draw system? How can this simple chit draw system give a more historical feel? Well, Adam's done a couple of things with this series. First of all, I love the addition of what are called the fatigue rules. Basically, this is a new rule to, well, I think the idea here is to limit the repeated activation of the same formation over and over again, or the same division over and over again. Basically, you'll track fatigue for each division, and the level of fatigue for the division can restrict what formations they can purchase, and indeed the purchase of formation period. So if you purchase a division activation, you add 1 to the division's fatigue. If this is during a night turn, you add 2 to the division's fatigue. Whereas if you don't purchase that division activation, you reduce the division's fatigue. So the purchase of those activations can basically restrict you from making additional purchases for that division, because during the preparation phase, your fatigue level can affect your troop quality. Basically, if you have a fatigue level of 5 or more, you reduce the entire division's troop quality by 1. Then, if your division's troop quality is 3 or less, you may not purchase formation activations. If your division's troop quality is 2 or less, you may not purchase division or formation activations. This is for American divisions. If you have a Japanese division with a troop quality of 1, they can't purchase formation activations. If they have a troop quality of 0, they can't purchase division or formation activations. So there's this close relationship between your ability to purchase formation and division activations with your troop quality, with fatigue. If you make too many division activations, you'll suffer fatigue. If you suffer too much fatigue, you'll suffer reductions in troop quality. And if you suffer those reductions in troop quality, you'll be sort of restricted in your ability to purchase formation and division activations. So all these things are really nicely related. It prevents you sort of abusing this division and formation activation system to basically activate the same division over and over again. It's a nice way to, I think, moderate the overuse of a division. They become fatigued, they reduce their quality, they can't activate anymore. Really simple, really easy to understand and implement, but it gives you this sort of slightly more historical flavour. Another addition, to this system is the use of, let me try and find it, wind markers. So I've commented on this in the past with the GTS, with the Grand Tactical series, that you can employ these very gamey tactics where you're placing these barrage markers to blind the enemy until the end of the turn, and it becomes a race to see who can blind the opponent first, and then once those barrage markers are down, your opponent cannot see for the end of the turn. This has been sort of fixed a little bit or addressed through the use of this wind marker. When that wind marker is drawn, you remove all barrage markers on the map. Now the great thing about this is it can happen at any time during a turn. Your opponent can try to blind you, place these barrage markers. The very next chit could be a wind marker, which blows away all that smoke. So it adds this uncertainty, and in my view, reduces those sort of gamey tactics. It gives it a more fluid, flowing sense of the ebb and flow of battle, rather than kind of this quite gamey dividing it into turns and the bombardments stay for 2 hours and that's fixed and so forth. I love the addition of those wind markers. Both players, so in Tinian they are called, here they are, Scotchu and Martini markers. Each player will have these, and they basically allow you to play them and re-roll a die roll. This is great. Some of you may see this as sort of a bit gamey, but sometimes you have these just critical moments where you roll terribly and you just want that re-roll. They're very limited. You can only use these once per day. So basically it enables you to get just one re-roll in one critical sort of combat sequence or bombardment or whatever once per day by using that counter. Very subtle, but just nice for those sort of critical moments when you need it. Now the accumulation and spending of dispatch points has changed as well. Basically, you roll a die during this preparation phase. If you roll less than or equal to your dispatch rating, you gain 3 dispatch points. If you roll higher than your rating, you just get 1 dispatch point. And your dispatch points are limited to 9. You can never get more than 9 dispatch points. And then you spend these slightly differently to GTS as well. You can pay 2 dispatch points to add a division activation chit to the cup for the current turn, or 1 dispatch point to add a formation chit to the cup for the current turn. There's no sort of future planning. And again, I like that idea. It makes formation activations cheaper, so they're only costing 1 dispatch point, and you don't have to worry about this future planning or where those chits go. They go straight in the cup each turn. No worrying about what happens next. Now, the company scale system also sees the introduction of what's called an initiative, and basically the way this works is whoever holds the initiative can immediately play an available formation chit before anything is drawn. And if they choose not to purchase one of those formation chits, then their opponent, typically the Japanese, will be able to make a similar purchase. Okay, well that about covers it for the preparation phase, seeding the cup, and just a summary of what the different activation markers do. In subsequent videos, I'll drill into more detail and start to talk about some of the actions you can choose to do with these units when they're activated.